Glass has been around for about 4,000 years, but it was the Romans that started to blow glass about 2,000 years ago, and it was considered then as a sort of industrial revolution, really. The material had never been worked in that way, and some of the forms that were created had never been seen on the earth before. And in fact, a lot of our modern forms and modern shapes come from those very early days of glass making.
Bristol glass actually was fairly unique insofar as it's fairly down home. A very handmade glass. The lines were incredibly true, slightly wonky. You can see it's handmade.
No one knows exactly when glass making was first done in Bristol. Certainly in the 15th century glass was being made in England, but at that time the glassmakers used wood-fired furnaces, and so they worked in forested areas. And around here they were working in the Forest of Dean. Now in 1611 a law was passed making it illegal to burn wood in glass furnaces. It was passed because of the enormous amount of deforestation that was going on. So at that point glassmakers all moved to their nearest coal fields, and the Forest of Dean glassmakers came down the river to Bristol where there were large coal fields. Bristol had a lot to offer glassmakers, really. The docks provided a convenient way of transporting raw materials and finished product. The Bristol merchants had continuous trade with America. There were also other raw materials. Sand was dug locally for bottles, and kelp was brought in from Ireland and burnt to provide potassium salts which are used in glass making. Red lead was available for lead crystal glass. Cobalt and other metals were brought in through the docks for making coloured glass. There were all kinds of different glass made in Bristol. The cheaper types of glass were window glass, called crown glass at the time, and bottle glass. They could both be made with fairly low-grade glass. Then there was what was then called flint glass, which is lead crystal glass, largely clear flint glass, which is made for tableware. And then finally the coloured and decorated glass, which became more famous than all the other kinds, really, particularly the blue glass.
It used to be thought that all blue glass was made in Bristol, but no, we now know it was made all over the country and indeed abroad as well. So we use the term rather loosely just to describe the colour.
When you add colour into clear lead crystal, you're not really adding a colour as such, but introducing a trace element that interferes with the rays of light passing through it. Cobalt reflects all the other frequencies of the spectrum away from itself and only allows blue to pass through. If you were to put iron into the glass, then it would only allow green light to pass through. And if you put gold in with the glass, it makes a very beautiful ruby colour, which is why ruby glass is so expensive.
We don't really know how popular Bristol Blue was in the 18th century. It survives in relatively small amounts when compared with clear glass. It was obviously for the very wealthy end of the market only, and most of the examples that survive have gilding on them, which would have made them even more expensive. Blue glass tends to be found in a very limited range of items. The ones that survive are decanters, sauce bottles, finger bowls, wine glass rinsers, and a few plates which may have been stands for the finger bowls.
Bristol glassmaking was really based on the export trade. In, say, the 1720s, 1730s, there would commonly be 3 or 4 ships leaving the port a week, each carrying perhaps 5,000 bottles, a couple of hundred wine glasses, 20 chests of window glass, huge amounts. Towards the end of the 18th century, when the American colonists began to start their own glass houses, that was really the time when the Bristol glass industry began to die, because we no longer had access to this huge monopoly market in the Americas. The Napoleonic Wars really spelt the beginning of the end for Bristol glassmaking. Shipping was greatly disrupted, and the taxation that was imposed to fund the war effort bore down quite hard on glassmakers and lots of other manufacturers as well. Once Bristol began to decline as an industrial region, it also began to decline as a port, because it doesn't have that many advantages as a natural port. Avonmouth is much better. And at that point, the port was very underfunded, and the combination of those factors led to a fairly widespread collapse in manufacturing and trade. Now, by about 1820 or 30, there was only one large glassmaking company left, Powell's. They actually carried on through the 19th century until about 1921, but for the last 70 years of their life they were making manufactured clear glass, window glass, and perhaps manufactured wine glasses and so on as well.
It was 1988. We were looking for some people who actually blew glass. We wanted to make contact with people who actually made glass, with an idea to do Bristol Blue glass in a hot glass studio in Bristol. So we had an art exhibition called Hot Glass 88, and we invited all people from the southwest who made glass, which was about 3 people at the time, to have an exhibition of their work. Peter was the most successful glassmaker. He made the most sympathetic stuff towards our goals.
The Bristol thing really took off in quite a big way after I met James Adlington. I exhibited in his gallery in Perry Road quite early on, I think about 1988, and we discussed the possibility of making blue glass at that time. The problem with blue glass really is that I would have had to stain the whole furnace, which I wasn't prepared to do at first because I was working with clear lead crystal, and the last thing I wanted to do was completely stain my furnace dark blue. So it took me quite a while really to take that step forward to stain the whole thing blue. I did that, I guess, in 1989. I had to go through quite a lot of experimentation, adding very small quantities of cobalt oxide, and eventually came up with a very nice strong blue colour for Bristol, and started to make quite large quantities of it and sell it through Jim's gallery.
I didn't know Peter very well at all then. I knew he had a campsite about half a mile from his house, so I pitched a tent on the campsite and gave him a call from the local pub, and he invited me over. I did some glass making with him. Then he went down the pub and left us to it. And well, from that moment on I was sold. I was going to do it.
I really wanted to come up to Bristol and try to recreate the industry. And eventually James managed to secure an old pottery for me in Colston Yard, which was perfect. It had all the old pottery equipment, and of course was possible to come up here and start to make blue glass in Bristol, which was the first time in about 150 years that the glass had been made here.
The molten glass is held in a furnace, which is just like a bath of glass, and we can gather it onto a hollow tube called a blowing iron, and then take it back to the glassmaker's chair. Using a wooden block, which is hollow, we can shape the glass into the required shape. It's a nice even round shape. We call it a parasol, which is almost like a folded up umbrella. This is a good shape so we can blow the glass evenly. The glassmaker's tools, which we call jacks, are then used to cut in the neck, and the bubble is started to be inflated with the use of pressure held down by the thumb. We use this because the first blow is like a balloon. It's more difficult to do it. From then on in, you can just mouth blow the piece. It's a sort of repetitive thing that you blow the glass and you cut in the neck, and blow the glass, cut in the neck. You can't blow the bubble out to the complete size all in one go, because basically the glass becomes unhandleable. So it's a repeated process. The jacks actually, they're like an extension of your fingers really, but they don't get burnt quite so much. Once you judge by eye that you've reached the size required for the particular piece you're making, you test it out with a set of calipers that are set to the required size. You can reheat the piece all the way throughout the making process by taking it to what's called a glory hole. This is a very, very hot chamber, which then keeps the glass at a workable temperature. Meanwhile, your assistant will be gathering a piece of glass from the furnace on a solid iron called a bit iron, and he can then bring you the stem, which is then cut off using the aid of parrot nose shears. Using the back of the jacks, you can shape the piece and make sure it's on nice and centrally. We keep going back to the glory hole. It's to keep all the pieces actually at a good workable temperature, because if the glass gets too cold it tends to shatter and fall all over the floor. Jacks here are used to cut in and to make a decorative knop on the bowl. And the assistant is used here with a pad just to make sure we've got a nice flat edge. The assistant brings you a hot piece of glass straight from the furnace, which is then just dropped straight onto that knob. The foot is then sort of spread out with the use of a pair of apple boards, which you can sandwich the glass between and just basically squeeze it out into the shape of a foot. If you look at handmade glass, you can actually see the circular lines going around it. Now, to complete the piece, it has to be transferred onto another rod called a pontil, and this is made by the assistant and brought to the chair again, and it is attached to the bottom of the foot as centrally as possible, and then another board is used to straighten the foot out so it's actually running concentric with the rest of the bowl, so the piece will stand up straight. You can then break it off the blowing iron using the jacks and a sharp tap. Once again we return to the glory hole to reheat the end that is now going to form the rim of the bowl. As that is reheated, you can use the jacks, place them inside, and using a bit of lift and a bit of force you can open it up to the required shape. Before the early part of the 19th century, all wine glasses were made using this technique. This is probably quite a good replica of a glass that would have been used in sort of like ale houses and drinking houses. Although we work in clear glass, we also exactly the same method used on the Bristol Blue glass. When Peter and I started, we made what we could make. We could make a small jug, we could make a small vase, we could make a paperweight. I think that was about it to start with. So we made those three things and basically flogged them as fast as we could make them. And as we worked harder and harder, we became better. And slowly the range developed, and it developed with our skill. And we ended up with some local lads that we were teaching. I mean, basically, we were teaching the guys. We were half an hour ahead of the guys that we were teaching. Like, you know, it was quite funny.
I met somebody in Bristol, first off, before I met Jim, in fact, who showed me some of their blue glass. So they've been working down here, they've been at college. And I was really impressed by it, and asked if I could see, because they were looking for people as well. So I went to meet Jim in a pub in Bristol, and he told me to turn up on the following Monday. I got in there and started to assist him. I found it quite daunting to start off with. I was afraid of getting burnt and, you know, afraid of bumping into somebody and causing accidents and all that kind of stuff. But after a while you just get used to how people move around the floor, and then there was a need for more glass makers. So my assistant sort of end of things would normally be, you know, a year or two, but it was about 6 months because of the need for new people to come up and, you know, take it on.
It was what was famous. I mean, it's what Bristol sort of like, the little bit of history that carried on through the people that they remembered. So we made the Bristol Blue here because there was a ready market for it.
But in the late 80s, we realised that we wanted to relaunch Bristol Cream in a far more contemporary style. We did a lot of research, and one of the elements of the research was the blue bottle. And it came out far and away the most popular colour glass to put Bristol Cream in. We were particularly pleased about this because clearly Bristol Blue and Bristol Cream and Bristol have got connections. And when Harveys were first founded in 1796, it was just at the time that Bristol Blue glass was coming into the area, and it was associated with fine dining and distinction and things like that. The blue glass came out on top in all aspects of the research. So consequently we took the plunge and launched Bristol Cream and Bristol Blue, which was a very brave decision because historically all wines and spirits have been in either clear glass, green glass, brown glass or black glass. So blue was something entirely new, but it's been extremely successful and we're very pleased with the results.
Well, when Peter and I set up the company, we both immediately started arguing about what we're going to do because we both had totally different ideas. I had an idea of a company that was making contemporary tableware, whereas Peter was an art glass maker and still is an art glass maker, and he wasn't really interested in tableware, so I had to go and sort of learn it myself.
Well, my own work is Tiffany iridescent work, which Bristol Blue is a great carriage for all of these because the background colour's there already. You actually can melt small quantities of coloured glass and apply them to the outside of the parison, which is the blob of glass that you start with. And you can decorate the piece, hook it and trail it, move the glass around on the surface. It's like working with hot toffee or sugar, and of course very fluid. But once the piece has been decorated, it can then be blown into a form. And of course all of the decoration expands with the piece, which is the great thing to watch. And in fact it's only the glass blower's eye that sees that. Everybody else misses it, but it's always good fun.
I can sit down and make, 50, 60 wine glasses the same in a day. But I do like going into a studio and just having a totally clear sheet and saying, right, we're going to make something that's going to be different. You can do all these different movements to sort of change the shape of the glass. You can do all sorts of things. And you know what goal, you've got a goal. When you're actually making something, you've got a goal. So you've got almost like a dance. You've got a routine to go through to get to that, thing. So, and if you vary off it, it doesn't go right, it goes wrong. So you're working within strict parameters, but you've got an ultimate freedom as well. And it's there, it's instant. And when it's done, it's finished, which is great.
A lot of the work that we do has been designed on the floor. It's been designed as we do it. We had a system going for a while where we had a day every 2 weeks. Everybody had a break from production work and they just do their own designs and stuff. And that worked quite well, really. You could spend a lot more time over pieces and relax a lot more about it. Everybody's got to do a certain amount of work for the company, but I think for true glass making you need to take time over it a bit more and consider it a bit more. Obviously it's all in blue, but you get a great education in the outside line of form. That's where it really does have strength, and learning the blue completely because you can't see through. Because in the glass world, a lot of it can go the other way, where the form isn't very good, but the colour technique is great. And it's harder to sell a piece like that. I think if you can catch someone's eye with a shape, you've got more of a chance of selling it. You can see shapes, three shapes. You can, you're making one thing, but halfway through there's another shape there that you could possibly do other things with, and make another completely different vessel. Completely different piece. I think applying handles and things I quite like that. It's quite fun, and it's sort of right on the edge. It's like you make the piece and then you're putting a handle on it. It's like, I like the edginess of it. I like where it goes to that line where it's make or break. I think that's probably my favourite part. It's exciting.
A couple of you might decide to work on a little bit and just have a mess around just to relax. Because even working all day in production work sometimes can be quite stressful. And so at the end of the day, it's brilliant just to have a bit of a play and just not actually think about making anything, just let the piece make itself. I'm a firm believer in glass making itself. The less you touch it, the better.
Glass itself seems to want to form itself into a particular shape, and you just sort of help it along, really. The tools haven't changed for 2,000 years. The blowing irons are exactly the same. In fact, if you looked into a Roman workshop, the glass would be worked in exactly the same way as we work it, apart from the fact that we have gas and they had wood-fired furnaces.
We didn't copy the original Bristol Blue forms because basically the glass is so close, we could make it so close. It was fairly rough and ready when they first made it. If we did it rough and ready now, basically you get people passing the stuff off as antiques. So we decided to keep away from the original Bristol Blue, and we've gone to sort of classical forms, things like that. You get inspirations from all the historical glass. Roman glass is really excellent. It's gorgeous stuff. The Islamic glass from the sort of medieval periods, then there's a Venetian glass from the Renaissance glass, which is what I'm working on at the moment. Totally different style of glass making to the English glass. You can't sort of say, oh God, I'm a great designer, I've invented something new. You haven't, because it's been done, millions of times before over the last 2,000 years.
The glassmakers worked in brick-built cones about 80 to 100 feet high, which had a large central furnace fed by air from underneath and fired on coal. There were archways all around the base of the cone. The reason they were built in the form of a cone was that once the furnaces were fired up, the upper brickwork would get tremendously hot and there'd be a huge updraft formed through the cone, and that updraft would enable them to get the furnaces up to the temperature they needed, 12 or 1300 degrees.
The skyline of Bristol would have been dotted with these huge towers back in the 1750s. And in fact, there's a possibility of establishing a proper museum of glassmaking in Bristol, contained within one of the cone forms. Bristol City Council and the SS Great Britain approached us to put one of these up. Well, the museum would consist of a working environment where international glassblowers can come and show off their skills, where we can train people. 200 years ago, glass blowers were brought in from all over Europe, and I'd very much like to see all this happen again. It's not that it's a repetition of history, but I think the modern movement should be this centre of excellence in Bristol, where international glass blowers come to Bristol to show off their skills and exhibit their craft.
The Bristol glass now is, I think it's quite sharp at the moment. We've actually had sort of customers come and say to us, it's too sharp, it doesn't look handmade. But I just think that's just something that is good. We've got very good makers working for us now.
Started off in Plymouth College of Art, where I studied ceramics for about 4 years. And at the end of that 4 years, we had a module on glass, and it sort of twigged and became really. It was very important to me that I had to carry on working in that material. It's a very fluid material, and instead of it being sort of, oh, okay, I'll do this, it's more of a passion, and you want to do it and you need to continue it. Something about it being fluid. I mean, I love the water, I love sailing, windsurfing, anything like that, and with the liquid material, it seemed to gel, really.
In my 5th year now, and in the glassmaking world, 5 years is about, on the floor, is probably a fairly good apprenticeship, really, to get yourself into gear, to have the skills, and well, then you start becoming a real glassmaker, really, and yeah, so about 5 years I've been doing it now, and still masses to learn. I'll never do it in my lifetime, but I think the immediacy of it all, the immediacy and the having to sort of have the skills there and then on the moment to finish anything, really, and making beautiful things. And just the whole scope of what you could do with it, having a skill in your hands, you'd be able to take it anywhere.
It's the glass is the important bit, and having the chance to earn money while you're working in it is brilliant. You can combine both things. A lot of people go through life going to work just purely for the money, and if you can go to work for the enjoyment as well, it's much better.
It's the next thing that I'm going to do. It's got to be my favourite things to do. I mean, as long as I can actually get into the studio and make stuff, I don't care what it is.
Glass is there in front of my eyes within 20 or 30 minutes, and I can express myself as an artist quite quickly and go on to the next piece. So although they appear to me as brief sketches, I'm always looking for the one piece that really, really turns me on, and of course I'll keep that for myself.
In the future, I think we should sort of do a slightly crossover between the Venetian style and the English style to create something that's quite individual and quite new.
I think Bristol Blue's become popular in recent years for a number of reasons. A, it's a novelty again, and people want something different, and it does look very good on the table. B, there's been a revival of interest in antiques generally, I think largely fuelled by all the television programmes we've had in recent decades. But C, I think Bristol's woken up to the fact that it had something that made the name of Bristol renowned throughout the world.